Hey everyone, very glad to be presenting here at this premier identity event today. We were looking forward to this event happening in Toronto, but with the circumstances, obviously it's had to turn online, but it's been quite awesome to do these online events. And we've gone through this with our own webinars that we've been running, where we're seeing people from all over the world that are coming and are interested in the stuff that we're talking about. So it's been awesome to really expand our reach. And we're all about community. We're all about learning and researching and sharing what we know and talking about what we're passionate about. So it's been quite nice to connect with people all over the globe. So welcome wherever you're from today. I'm very glad that you could be part of this event. My name is Mathieu Glaude. I'm the founder and CEO of Northern Block. So we're a Toronto-based technology service company, and we're focused on solving problems using decentralized identities and blockchains. And so my presentation today is titled Using Verifiable Credentials for Access Management. Now, access management is a massive industry, like I'm sure most of you know, and it covers both digital and the physical realms. And organizations tend to often use many access management systems internally all across their businesses. So it's a normal practice to use many different applications because many of them are built for specific use cases, so they solve specific problems. However, having all of these systems throughout the business does add some complexity and risk to synchronizing all of the systems together. And whenever problems arise, massive deep dives or audits are required to really understand what happened. So I want to explore with you today how verifiable credentials, which are a standard for expressing and exchanging claims, which are verified by third parties, can be used for access management. There's a lot of benefits to it. And verifiable credentials have been gaining a lot of acceptance and traction. And so for those who don't know, they were developed and they're becoming an evolving standard within the World Wide Web Consortium. So we started off in the blockchain space in 2017. We've worked on a multitude of enterprise-grade systems that use blockchain. And we've recently made some investments into self-sovereign identity, realizing that it solves many problems with our existing solutions. So the existing decentralized solutions that we're building could really benefit from it. But it also opens up a multitude of benefits beyond decentralized solutions for people, organizations, and societies as a whole. And so our first digital identity project was a proof of concept we did with the Ontario government that showcased how a blockchain could be used to give citizens of Ontario back control of their personal information. So that kind of got us thinking about decentralized identities. But then late last year, we officially crossed paths with the self-sovereign identity community after we took on a project to facilitate private firearm transfers in the US. So we really realized the importance of preserving privacy for firearm owners. And it got us deep into the full SSI stack, which really excited us. And what really excited us was that the underlying technology of self-sovereign identity is ready for early adoptions by businesses. So we're at kind of an inflection point right now. We're currently working on 2 implementations of self-sovereign identity and verifiable credentials, which is a big piece of self-sovereign identity. The first one I just mentioned, which is the B2C one with VeriTransfer, and then the second one with VeriText is more of a B2B business case that uses verifiable credentials to onboard businesses to a decentralized ecosystem for aerospace parts. Just a bit about our association. So we joined the DIAC earlier this year, really to help bridge real-world policy and governance to the solutions themselves that we're building. And we also joined the Trust Over IP Foundation as a founding member to contribute towards the advancement of the 4-layer governance and technical stack, which we'll cover a little bit later in this presentation. We're also a member of the Open Digital Trust Working Group as part of the Institute of International Finance. And to give back to our local community and push forward SSI adoption, we founded SSI Toronto this February. And so for those who are interested, we have an event coming up next week on June 24th, where we'll be focusing on use cases of self-sovereign identity for B2B transactions. And we have some great guests from Veritex, our client in the aerospace and defense sector. And we also have representation from the University of Arkansas who are also members of the Trust over IP, and they're doing a lot of cool stuff in both SSI and blockchain. So you can find out more info about this through the Northern Block website, Twitter account, or just by Googling SSI Toronto. So let's start with an introduction to verifiable credentials. Really a core innovation that will lead us to think a bit differently about access management. We like to use stories to explain these concepts because, we think stories are just a great way to explain concepts that seem complicated and full of jargon sometimes. So let's get into it. So let's meet Jimmy. So Jimmy is about to start a new job at a company in Toronto. So Jimmy just moved to Toronto from Vancouver before his job start date and found a good deal on an apartment rental. So Jimmy contacted the real estate broker, had a good initial conversation with them, and the broker will now need Jimmy to provide certain information so that they could assess his eligibility before renting the unit to him. So Jimmy is being asked to provide his legal name and age, which could be found in a piece of government ID. Jimmy's being asked to provide a proof of him being employed, as in a signed letter of employment from the employer, and proof of sufficient funds, showing he has enough money for at least half a year's rent. So Jimmy has a valid driver's license from back home in British Columbia, which does contain his legal name and his age. And like most, Jimmy carries this card with him in his wallet. However, Jimmy doesn't have anything on him to prove that he's employed or that he has sufficient funds, so he's going to need to go get those. So to get the proof of employment, Jimmy goes to the office to ask the HR manager for a letter of employment. So at the office, the HR manager prints out an official company letter for Jimmy, and this letter indicates his start date and his position with the company. So Jimmy takes the letter, stores it in his beautiful paper folder, and leaves the office. So now to get the proof of funds, Jimmy needs to go to the bank where he just opened up a new account. So at the bank, a representative prints a statement for Jimmy that displays his bank balance within his checking account. So Jimmy takes the paper statement, stores it in the same beautiful paper folder, and leaves the bank. Now that Jimmy has everything he needs, he goes to the broker, presents the original copies of his driver's license, employment letter, and banking statement. And the broker verifies the original documents, makes photocopies of each of them for their records. And now satisfied with the documents, the broker tells Jimmy they'll need a couple of days to process everything, and they'll call Jimmy back when they're done. So Jimmy goes back home with his documents, leaving the photocopies with the broker. So 2 days later, Jimmy gets a phone call from the broker who says, you know what, everything checked out, and we'd love to rent the apartment to you. So Jimmy goes back to the broker's office to sign a rental agreement. So he gets a copy of the fully executed agreement while the broker keeps a copy for themselves, which they just keep alongside Jimmy's other documents in their folder. So Jimmy puts the copy of the agreement in the same folder with his bank statement, which he'll throw into a drawer in his desk. And that's how a lot of things are done today. Let's see how this could be different, like the same scenario, how we could do this a little differently with self-sovereign identity and verifiable credentials in the mix. So many things would stay similar with SSI, but much better, as you'll see. So Jimmy would still have a wallet, but instead of a physical one, he would have a digital self-sovereign identity wallet on his smartphone. Instead of a physical copy of his driver's license, Jimmy's driver's license would be in his SSI wallet in a digital format. Instead of getting a printed copy of his employment letter, Jimmy could ask his HR manager to send a digital copy directly to his wallet so that he didn't have to go to the office himself. And you know what? He didn't have to store a printout afterwards either. Now, Jimmy would make the exact same type of request to his bank for the bank statement. The bank would issue the bank statement in a digital format right into his wallet alongside the other pieces of information that he's been storing there. So knowing Jimmy has everything needed, the real estate broker could send Jimmy a proof request. And really this, in the real world, could all be done in an automated fashion. So Jimmy could just self-serve on a website, for example, to initiate this process. So a proof request is sent to Jimmy. Upon receiving the request, a notification would pop up in Jimmy's wallet. So the detailed information is shown here in the blue box. The real estate broker is not really expecting to receive complete paper credentials or documents that contain pieces of information they need, but instead only the information itself at a minimum level. So knowing he has all the information and being comfortable sharing it with the real estate broker, Jimmy accepts the request. So the broker would then immediately receive the information on their end. So after receiving Jimmy's information that proved his eligibility to rent out the apartment, the broker would happily decide to rent it to him. So the broker executes the rental agreement signature on their end and then sends the agreement directly to Jimmy's SSI wallet. So Jimmy reviews the agreement inside his wallet and accepts it by signing with his digital signature. So then the fully executed agreement will be stored in Jimmy's wallet, again, alongside all these other documents, in his possession. The broker would have the same agreement in their system alongside the very limited information at this point that they have about Jimmy. They don't have photocopies of all his documents. They have very limited information, as seen here in the gray box. So that's it. Simple, isn't it? So how does the real estate broker know if the information Jimmy provides through his SSI wallet is valid and trustworthy? Good question. So self-sovereign identity enables a new model called the Verifiable Credential model, or here the Verifiable Credential Trust Triangle, which makes what this very simple process we saw possible. So no matter what type of credential, this triangle involves the same three primary roles. So the first one are the issuers, which are the source of these credentials. So every credential has to have an issuer of the credential. Most issuers will be organizations or government agencies that could issue things like passports, or financial institutions, for example, which could issue credit cards or statements like we just saw in Jimmy's example, and so forth. Holders will be the ones that request credentials from issuers, and they'll hold them in their wallets. And then they could use these credentials and present them when being requested by verifiers. So although we commonly think of individuals as holders, holders could also be organizations or even things such as an IoT device. And the third one, the verifier on the right, verifier could be anyone seeking trust assurance of some kind about the holder of a credential. So verifiers request the credentials they need and then follow their own policy to verify their authenticity and validity. So in the example we just went through, the issuers were the company that Jimmy is employed with and the financial institution that he banks with. The holder is Jimmy himself, and the verifier in this case was the real estate broker. So these three groups are all using systems enabled by an SSI infrastructure, such as the wallet that Jimmy has would be enabled by this SSI infrastructure. So using self-sovereign identity, an issuer could sign and issue credentials to the holder. The holder then presents them when being requested by a verifier. And there's a key difference here between proofs and verifiable credentials, whereas proofs contain certain pieces of information that could come from different verifiable credentials, such as from a driver's license, an employment letter, or a bank statement. Also, the information in a proof doesn't necessarily need to actually contain the values from a verifiable credential, which is interesting. So information exchange could be done in a way more private way. And we call this a zero knowledge proof, by which a holder only needs to present the minimum amount of information a verifier needs. So in Jimmy's case, not necessarily his full driver's license or even his age, only if he's over 18 or not. So the infrastructure is powered by a blockchain. Certain information of the issuer is written to the blockchain so that when a verifier receives a proof, they'll be able to query the blockchain to find out four things. One, who issued which piece of information. Two, if the information was actually issued to the holder themselves. Three, if the information was altered or changed by the holder in between time. And four, if the information is still valid upon receipt. So SSI enables a trust over IP stack, since the trust is built right into the system here. And for that reason, there's no need for integration between the issuer and the verifier. It's a decentralized architecture. So there doesn't need to be any integration between the issuer and the verifier, as long as their systems are compatible with this trust over IP infrastructure. So a little more on this trust over IP, because it's really a crucial part to this whole model. So last month, Northern Block and 28 other founding member organizations launched the Trust over IP Foundation, which is a new project hosted within the Linux Foundation, with a goal to enable the trustworthy exchange and verification of data between any two parties on the internet. So we're really grateful and honored to have this opportunity to contribute to the Trust over IP Foundation. And it's awesome to work alongside best-in-class industry and identity people to bring this global scale trust to the internet. So the vision we all share is embodied in the Trust over IP stack, a dual stacked design. So it directly acknowledges that trust is an outcome of how we, as humans, organize ourselves and the technology we use to convey information between ourselves. So we place governance here on the left in orange. So in other words, implementing trust over IP-based solutions should begin with business requirements, then move to policy requirements transparently communicated in governance frameworks. Only then should you choose the technology components required to implement those policies. So governance is quite important here, and which is why it's placed in front of technology. So to quickly explain this stack, starting with the bottom layer, layer 1, although technical trust is machine to machine, implementing technical trust still requires humans to design, code, test, and certify these systems. So this is the job of layer 1, utility governance. So the utility governance frameworks that specify the policies under which a utility, in our example, we were using a blockchain, is implemented and operated such that it could be trusted by the higher levels on top. So layer 1 is about the strong cryptographic roots of technical trust, so the roots of trust. And then layer 2 is about the branches. So the digital wallets, the digital agents, all these things needed to secure, to form secure peer-to-peer connections using either public identifiers or peer-to-peer identifiers. So layers 3 and 4 are where human trust is established and maintained. So on the technical side of the stack, layer 3 is the home of this verifiable credential trust triangle that we just discussed, which in this design here is laid out flat, a flat process that makes it a little more clear that there's no need for a relationship to happen between the verifier and the issuer to trust the credentials being presented. So almost any digital credential that will be issued by multiple issuers or accepted by a wide range of verifiers needs a credential governance framework. So the governance framework defines what issuers will issue what credentials, under what policies, to what holders, with what levels of assurance, and so forth. And then finally, layer 4 is specifically designed to enable digital trust ecosystems. So entire families of applications and credentials that are not only designed to interoperate technically, but which share a common ecosystem governance framework. So using verifiable credentials for access management. So in the Jimmy example we went over, Jimmy was able to use verifiable credentials to authenticate himself and then for the real estate broker to authorize him to take lease of the apartment. So now in the enterprise world, access management is a very costly and complex thing to manage. And companies focus on parameter definition to put in security measures and policies, right? And parameters are becoming harder and harder to manage. So we're seeing a lot of CIOs and CSIOs and leadership of organizations spending a lot of time and money to manage risk around access management of their parameters. So security isn't limited to 4 walls of an organization. It needs to cover an ecosystem. And the same thing can be said about assets. Assets aren't sitting within the 4 walls of an organization either. So information security needs to manage security across all these various components. So applications could be sitting on premise, they could be in private clouds and partner apps and public clouds and SaaS apps. An enterprise could have various ecosystems of contractors, vendors, suppliers, partners, customers. Employees require various accesses based on many, many different factors. Applications could be accessed through enterprise computers and enterprise issued devices, but also through public computers, public devices, IoT devices. And physical access is typically not part of a convergent security strategy alongside digital and business continuity, but physical access management is a massive thing as well. So the way today people manage these accesses are typically through the role-based access control method. So role-based access control has been the most common way that organizations have bucketed groups of employees, vendors, customers to specific rights and privileges. And this method is typically managed within the four walls of an organization. So you could see here, the organization has walls around the process. So a quick definition. So this is all based on the identity of a user or subject on the left there, requesting execution of a capability to perform an operation, such as read an object or resource, which could be a file. So this is done either directly or through predefined attribute types, such as role groups assigned to that user. So using this method, organizations are required to spend lots of effort defining their parameters and ensuring they're protecting everything within those four walls. So ultimately, role-based access control, we don't think it's a scalable model for open ecosystems, and we'll see why in the upcoming slides. So a second method for access management is to use attribute-based access control. So in this method, the subject requests to perform operations on objects and is granted or denied access based on different things. So it's based on assigned attributes of the subject, assigned attributes of the object on the other side, or by incorporating environmental conditions or context into the decisioning. So attribute-based access control enables precise access control. So it allows for a higher number of discrete inputs into the access control decision. So it provides a bigger set of possible combinations of those variables to reflect a larger and more definitive set of possible rules to express policies. So it's much larger than the role-based access control method. So the access control policies that could be implemented in attribute-based access control are limited only really by the computational language and the richness of the available attributes. So the flexibility here enables a greater breadth of subjects to access the greater breadth of objects without specifying individual relationships between each other and each object. So whereas role-based access doesn't really support multi-factor decisions, and really trying to do so leads to role explosion and complexity and risk. So under attribute-based access control, access decisions could change between requests by simply changing attribute values. So without the need to change the subject or object relationships, defining underlying rule sets. So it provides a way more dynamic access control management capability, and it really limits long-term maintenance requirements of object protections. So that's another problem with role-based access control models, is that if the access control requirements are changed, it may be difficult to identify all the places where the role-based implementations need to be updated. And the last point here, quick deployments of new policies. So attribute-based access control enables object owners or administrators to apply access control policy without having prior knowledge of the specific subjects, and for an unlimited number of subjects that might require access. So as new subjects join the organization or are required to gain access, rules and objects do not need to be modified, unlike with the role-based access control. So now, verifiable credential-based access control, you gotta love the acronyms here, we keep adding them. It's a lot like attribute-based access control. However, the attributes are replaced with verifiable credentials. And for simplicity in this example, we'll just drop the external conditions and context. So with verifiable credentials, we also don't need to necessarily have a walled garden, because the organization doesn't really need to be defining their perimeter if trust is built in right into the credential exchange ecosystem. And lastly, and quite importantly, the verifiable credentials could come from multiple issuers, right? Which is a major innovation here. So all of a sudden, we have all the benefits of attribute-based access control, but with the portability of credentials beyond an organization's four walls. So it enables quick and secure collaboration across an enterprise's boundaries. So we really see this model having its roots within organizations that are geographically distributed and or have a highly mobile workforce, which we're seeing more and more today. It seems like a big trend. Another common scenario we see immediate value for this model is with an enterprise that has a lot of on-site visitors and contract service providers who all require limited access to enterprise resources to do their work. And remember, this example or this model could be implemented across both digital and physical realms. So verifiable credential-based access control is a great solution for use cases around bring your own ID as well. So it becomes really powerful, right? And it enables organizations to share security risks, it enables organizations to lower maintenance costs and strengthen their access and authorization decisioning through a lot more inputs, trusted inputs, and the ability to make real-time adjustments without causing a lot of overhead. So that's it for my presentation. Thank you once again to the whole IdentityNORTH team for organizing this fabulous digital conference. It's a phenomenal event. And if anyone has any thoughts or questions, feel free to reach out to me directly through email or Twitter or just through any Northern Block channel online.